Sweet sustenance. Oh, hello Internet, and welcome to another installment of Romney's Reviews. Now, I'm not all that familiar with the works of Ridley Scott. I learned more about him in high school, but during the time that his films were coming out, some of them I wasn't even born yet, and other ones I just wasn't that interested. As a kid, I wasn't really quite the kid that was interested in a lot of the sci-fi or horror films like a lot of other kids my age were. So I kind of missed the ship on the Aliens franchise when it comes to that, for better or for worse. But all I know is about this film, this week's subject, Prometheus, is that it was originally touted as a prequel to Alien before the official title was announced. And let me be blunt here, at the showing I went to, I was running really late. Thankfully, previews are like 15 minutes long in most theaters, at least here in Utah. But I still think I missed a good chunk of the film. Well, not really a good chunk, more like the first 1 or 2 minutes. So there may have been something at the beginning that probably would have made a lot of things make a little more sense, but even with the amount I saw, I didn't really get lost, so I believe I'll still be able to make a fair judgment on this case. Now this film is about two scientists who essentially find a string of artifacts from all these different civilizations that are millions and millions of years apart that all have these same symbols, which are like these 5-star sort of thing, which is probably in reference to a constellation of some sort, and they pretty much connect the dots and believe that that's where our maker is. And that's an interesting subject that I haven't seen a lot of mainstream sci-fi movies actually explore, is what if we actually did get to meet our makers? And I'm guessing from a lot of people that this is kind of Ridley Scott style. It's very like epic, but it also really makes you think. When it comes to the acting, everything was really well done. Michael Fassbender does a really good job as David, and even some of the side characters are likable. Like a lot of the people you see on the ship, like the geologist, and even just some of the crew, even the captain, they all do a really good job. The scientists, like the head scientists, you don't really get to know them that well, so there isn't a lot of development in their case except for their relationship to each other and their initial goal. So I didn't get really attached to the people who were supposed to be kind of the main characters, even during some of the more dramatic scenes of the film. What really caught more of my attention was a lot more of the design and a lot more of the scale of, well, everything. Don't get me wrong, but did anyone else think that all the sci-fi suits and stuff they were wearing, like the exploration suits, looked a lot like the ones from Mass Effect? Again, I haven't seen any of the previous Alien films, so I don't know if that's what the costumes looked like in the previous films, but I saw those costumes and I kept thinking, huh, Mass Effect. And I don't mean that in a bad way. The suits look pretty cool and actually a lot more functional than a lot of the other sci-fi suits that I've seen. Now, like I mentioned before, this film really does make you think, but it doesn't really have like any overall message, which is another thing I like, because another problem with a lot of sci-fi stuff is they try to have a message, whereas this one just kind of it lets you really just think about it. I mean, what if you could actually go somewhere and meet the people who created you and try to seek out the answers to a lot of the meaningful questions that philosophers ask on a regular basis, like who are we, why are we here, where are we going, all that bric-a-brac. Just everything is just treated in such a large scale, but with this nice cerebral subtext. Again, that's something I find pretty rare in a lot of the sci-fi films I've seen throughout my life. That's kind of like Zecharia Sitchin territory. And a lot of you watching this probably have no idea who Zecharia Sitchin is. However, there are some problems with the film. Most of the problems with the film come around in the third act. Because in the third act, they lay out a whole bunch of this exposition in a very clunky way. It's like saying, oh, let's get all these super revealing details out at the very end, pile on the shocks right one after another in order to, I don't know what was supposed to accomplish. It was kind of one of those cases if they didn't have all that exposition or had the characters trying to essentially summarize everything through dialogue, it probably would have made for a much stronger film. Now, when it comes to like the action-y scenes and a lot more of the frightening scenes, there's some pretty good stuff here. I mean, when they're first exploring the pyramid like, location, place. You see some pretty interesting stuff, some genuinely scary stuff that's typical of the Ridley Scott sci-fi horror fare. There is one scene in particular, it's actually pretty gory when you think about it, but it also shows a lot of resourcefulness on the part of one of the main characters, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, played by the original girl with the dragon tattoo, Noomi Rapace. I'm not going to go into much detail because, well, when I try to think about it in my head, it kind of makes me sick. But again, I'll just say this. Basically, there's like some sort of contamination, and how this character gets the contaminant out of her body is actually pretty dang resourceful, as well as showing essentially the technology in a very clever way, in a way that it would probably actually be designed. Now, I don't think this is so much a spoiler, but basically one of the technologies they show is this pod that essentially performs surgery. And what I found was interesting is that the pod that was on their ship was configured primarily for males rather than females, and it basically just tells you right off the bat. That's actually, from a futurist scientific standpoint, that makes a lot of sense, because, sorry ladies, but guys and girl bodies are starkly different from one another on the inside because of a lot of the different internal organs and a lot of the different health problems we have to deal with. That's just the hard reality. And so that's probably how that kind of technology would be designed. And a way a lot of the technology, even though it doesn't actually exist, it just gives you the idea that it could exist. That's one thing I like about sci-fi films like this, that they actually create stuff using logic. They don't just say, oh, random Deus Ex Machina gun. It's just like, okay, well, here's the stasis chamber, here's how people communicate through the stasis chamber using this helmet, or here's a medical device used to save lives that performs surgery instead of having humans do it, which would make sense in space, instead of having a doctor who could easily become contaminated with the very disease that he's trying to treat. You essentially have a machine do it that operates on you, lets you out, and then decontaminates shortly thereafter. It's a pretty clever idea, and that's one thing I also like, is just a lot of the sci-fi technology you see here is, well, practical. It all makes sense. Even some of the stuff that they discover, it all makes sense. That's another problem with a lot of sci-fi stuff that I've seen, is that you get a lot of the technology that is just pointless and usually just made as a MacGuffin or a, like I said, a Deus Ex Machina. Like I mentioned previously, this film was originally pitched as a prequel to the Aliens franchise. And with a lot of the things you see in this film, it definitely shows that that was definitely the original intent behind this film, because there's a lot of elements in it that you can tell were lifted from the Aliens franchise. And even in a post-credits scene that you see, it just really shows that, hey, this was originally intended to be an Aliens prequel. So on my personal scale, I'm going to give Prometheus a 4.5 out of 5. Now, like I mentioned before, it lost some points for the clunky exposition in the third act. I mean, it had a very good, thought-provoking story, the performances from all the actors were really good, and it had sci-fi technology that made sense, as well as a nice little epic scale to it all. But the exposition kind of is... Although it's a very minor thing, I just think it could have been handled a little bit better, and so that's why I'm not going to give it my full score. So that's it for this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. Tune in next week where I will be reviewing Rock of Ages. Look forward to it. And if you've been wondering about this shirt I've been wearing in a couple of the episodes, it actually says Long Live Short Films, and it was a shirt that I got from the Shorty Awards, because I composed music for an animated short, which I will have a link for in the description, and it actually won in the Shorty Awards, and so yeah, that's how I got this shirt.